Someone asked me the other day, what does a chief diversity officer do? And I said, quite honestly, it's managing people, crises, and expectations. That's really and truly what it
Mm.
is. And so you never know what's going to fall on your plate at any given time. But I've learned a lot. I've learned from a lot of great leaders in my time and in both college athletics, but also in higher ed administration. And I've learned from what they've done well, but I've also learned from their mistakes too, and how they would go back and maybe do those things differently as well. So I've been really fortunate to work under a lot of great leaders.
Welcome to Show Your Receipts, where we believe if you can see it, you can be it. Receipts are evidence or proof that something has occurred. Our guests are evidence that Black excellence is alive and well. They will be sharing their receipts on how they've been able to accomplish so much in their life. I'm your host, Tony Jackson. Let's get started. Welcome to Show Your Receipts, where we believe if you can see it, you can be it. Our guest today is phenomenal. We have a guest who specializes in the educational field. Dr. Elizabeth and Tovar is who we're going to be speaking with today. Let me give you a little bit of her background before we get started. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Kansas. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology from the University of Kansas. She has a PhD in leadership and policy studies from the University of Kansas. She holds several positions. She is United Way of Johnson County and Washtenaw County's Board of Directors. She's a KU Endowment Board of Trustees. She's AAU Chief Diversity Officer Steering Committee. She's the chair of the NCAA Region 3 Postgraduate Scholarship Committee, and so much more. I could keep going. I am so excited to have her on the Show Your Receipts podcast. Welcome, Dr. Tovar. I'm sorry, Liz. Welcome.
Liz, that's right. That's right. Listen, as I told you the other day, I go by Liz, not Dr. Tovar, but it's a pleasure to be on here today with a former Hawkeye. I have to be honest with you. And I've been reading your resume as well, and you've been doing some incredible work, inspirational work. And so just want to applaud you for everything that you've done as well.
Wow, thank you. You're making me blush. You can't even tell, but thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm excited to get started. Let's jump right into it. And obviously you have a very strong background in psychology and clinical psychology. Would you mind sharing just explaining your career and kind of what you do right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So my psychology background really is paying off for me. I serve in two positions at the University of Iowa. One is Senior Associate Athletics Director, overseeing all of the academic services for our 650 student athletes at Iowa. And then I also have a role on campus serving on the President's Cabinet as our Executive Officer and Associate Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So I stay very busy. I just finished my 10th year here at the University of Iowa. I've loved every single part about being a Hawkeye. The greatest thing for me is being able to go out and partner and collaborate with incredible people all across our campus, as well as in our community and across our state. And I tell people, they always ask me, why Iowa? Why have you been there so long? And for me, it really comes down to the people and also the work that I'm able to do every day. So that's where I'm at. I've spent the past 25 years, though, working in higher education. I got my start, my first 11 years working at the University of Kansas in their athletics department, student athlete academic services. Then I made 2 stops along the way, one at Ohio State, one at Northern Illinois University, and then now here at the University of Iowa, where I'm enjoying every minute of it.
That is awesome. I'm definitely a proud Hawkeye as well. It's exciting to be able to talk to you today. And so let's dive a little bit into being a university administrator. That's something that you've done for a huge part of your career in major colleges and universities. I guess the question I have for you is, what does a normal day look like for an administrator? Are you just in meetings all day? What exactly are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So being a college administrator, if I'm going to be very transparent with you, it was not something that I set out to do. It was not on my radar. My initial goal was that I wanted to go and become a clinical psychologist. And about midway through my grad program, I started serving on a lot of search committees and volunteering at the University of Kansas. And I liked just being able to make a difference on a college campus. And that includes making some very hard and sometimes important decisions that impact the people on our campus. And so a lot of my day, every single day is different for me. Earlier this week, we had a president's cabinet. Then I go to the athletics department and serve on their senior administration team and meetings. I also work with students on a day-to-day basis and listen to them and help them navigate life, or at least try to, because I too was once a college student. But then another big part of my job is, okay, let's look at the areas that, what are the situations that are happening on our campus where that we need to fix. And so a lot of my job is really helping people navigate problems, issues, and concerns. Someone asked me the other day, what does a chief diversity officer do? And I said, quite honestly, it's managing people, crises, and expectations. That's really and truly what it is. And so you never know what's going to fall on your plate at any given time. But I've learned a lot. I've learned from a lot of great leaders in my time and in both college athletics, but also in higher ed administration. And I've learned from what they've done well, but I've also learned from their mistakes too, and how they would go back and maybe do those things differently as well. So I've been really fortunate to work under a lot of great leaders.
That is awesome. So let's dive into, because it's obvious that you have, it seems that you have a passion, that you have a mission, and higher education is very much involved in that. Looking at your resume, you are the quintessential academic. And I mean that in all positive ways. That's you really dedicated your life to higher education. Talk to me about, because obviously this podcast is really much speaking toward Black professionals and Black small business owners. Talk to me about what you're seeing. I'm having a front row seat as far as who's going to college, who's not going to college. What's the ramifications of going to college? Is it more males? Is it more females? How is that playing out in the working world based upon these kind of decisions? Because you hear a lot of conversations now with people saying, you don't have to go to college. You could, so many other routes to success is not for everyone. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Higher education, we have to remember, has a long storied history. And some of that history where people who look like me were not included at the table. And what I'm really proud is around the progress that we've made in this area to allow people from all different backgrounds to be sitting around a table and solving real world issues. I love and appreciate that, right? And I know that a lot of people who came before me did not always have that opportunity, and access to higher education has not always been where it is now. Do we have a ways to go? Absolutely. Are we perfect? No. But I do think that we are trending in the right direction. Every single spring I have the chance to talk to a number of student groups and student orgs. And the thing that I've noticed about those particular groups is that, and I'm not just talking about race and ethnicity, but they're made up of people that come from rural America, urban areas. Some people have never lived in the state of Iowa. Others of them have. They all have different passions, all have different things that they can potentially bring to the table. And I really see my role as being an inclusive leader, right? And there are three things that really and truly takes. Number one is, how do you build a good culture within an organization where everyone can be productive and contribute to a common goal? I use our women's basketball team as a great example of that, right? People from all different backgrounds coming together to work together to win a game, right? It's also about helping people find community. And a lot of what I do in my role is helping people find, where do you fit in on our campus? What are you passionate about? And you really need to start there. Because I think too much of the time people think, I'm coming to Iowa, it's such a big place. The great thing about us is that we have people coming here from all over the world, right? And so chances are you're going to be able to find and find your community that you fit in with and where you can thrive. And then I think the third part of my job in terms of being an inclusive leader is helping people find common ground. When I'm in meetings every day, sometimes we don't always agree with one another on things, right? And people need to understand that's okay. It's how you see yourself through some of those challenges in some of those areas. And that's what my job is. That's what my job is to do every single day. So
that is amazing. And so I know this is the first time I've ever interviewed a Hawkeye, somebody who's in Iowa campus. And so I can relate on a lot of levels. I remember being a student athlete at Iowa, and the question I have for you was about representation and just having those visuals. I remember the first time I got there and the first time I saw Fred Mims and Marvin Sims.
That's right.
And they were like a breath of fresh air to me because they were connected to the team, but they were administrators. They weren't coaches. They weren't. So it gave me a visual of, wow, maybe there is a way for me to do what they're doing. Maybe I can, outside of football, have this professional career. Talk to me about your thoughts on the role that you play, not just what you do,
right,
but who you are and where you're doing it.
Right. Absolutely. Something I always share with people is that I am in two very visible roles, and it's not outside the realm of possibility where I will have a random student just reach out to me just to say, Liz, how do you navigate certain things? They're not looking for academic advice necessarily, but they're looking for personal advice, or maybe they have an interest in getting into college athletics or getting into administration. And I've had people just like Fred Mims, who have helped mentor me and guide me along the way. And what I'm trying to do is do the exact same thing for this next generation of people, all people, doesn't matter what you look like, all people who want to come into this space and everything. When I was at the University of campus, I made sure to have mentors who, some of which look like me and some of which didn't look like me, because I knew that the workforce that I was going into 9 times out of 10, when I'm at the table, I'm going to be the only person who looks like me around the table, right? So my job is to create opportunities for people. I always tell people, don't do things exactly how Liz Tovar has done them. Be your own person. We all, again, have different talents and different passions in life. And so how can I help that those next generation of Hawkeyes get out there and succeed in a globally diverse society as well as workforce?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's take it back a little bit, Liz. I would love to hear about your upbringing, who's been inspirational to you, whether it be parents, coaches, mentors. I would love to hear your story on how you became who you are today.
Yeah, great question. Where do I even begin? I was born and raised in Kansas. I am a Jayhawk. I definitely am. But what a lot of people don't know about me is that my father's family, they came from a long line of farming family. They're a really large farming family in eastern Kansas. And so a lot of my younger days were spent on my grandparents' farm and riding tractors and getting out into the fields and having a lot of fun. But I also come from a long line of educators as well, going back to my great uncle, who, interestingly enough, was one of the first African Americans to be admitted to KU Med School. And then fast forward to my dad worked in corporate America. My mom worked at the University of Kansas. So she was an administrator for many years at KU in their School of Engineering. And I knew from the very beginning that education was a powerful tool. And when I say education, it could be formally, but it also can be informally. I'm a huge fan of reading books. That's what I do in all of my spare time. But education is so critical. We always say knowledge is power. And it really is true. You need to learn about the world around you. It's not just about a career. The piece of advice that I always give to my students is, don't think about titles and salaries. Think about where you can make a contribution, a positive contribution in the world. And if you go into something and you're passionate about that, then everything else will come along for you. Again, I never expected to be a chief diversity officer at an institution of higher education, but I like learning. I like a good challenge, and that's what I need in order to be successful in life. But my high school days, my college days, I really tried to surround myself with people who may not always thought the way that I thought or grew up the way that I grew up. I appreciate learning about people and who they are, what their story is. Storytelling is such a powerful tool. I think it's sometimes underutilized because we can learn a lot from just a story alone, and from learning from people and how they got to be where they are, even though our paths may be different in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you have big influences from uncle,
Mhm.
grandparents, parents.
Yeah.
It's a whole village.
Exactly. A whole village of people. And I'm really grateful for that. And I'm also really selective about it. And I'll tell you a quick story. Never envisioned working in college athletics, but as I was coming out of high school, I was trying to decide. I knew I wanted to go into psychology, but as my mom reminded me, she says, if you're going into psychology, you're going to be in school for a really long time, right? And so I did a couple of informational interviews with a few psychologists, and one of them happened to be a staff psychologist on the men's basketball team at Kansas. I wasn't looking for a job, just wanted to go in and get an informational interview. And before you knew it, I had a role working in their athletics department and had wonderful mentors that I met there all throughout my grad school experiences, had people who really and truly believed in me. Because there were times, honestly, that I wanted to give up. There really and truly were, and times get hard, but you have to keep going, you know? And so anyway, again, just really grateful how my path in life, it wasn't something that I was really charting out to do, but 25 years later, I'm still in it and still doing it.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that because it's a lot of conversation on the dropout rate of just college students in general,
Yeah.
oftentimes Black college students as well. I remember going to Iowa and I felt like it was a couple of guys on the football team that the reason why they didn't make it to the next year had nothing to do with their intelligence, had nothing to do with their athletic ability, but you could just tell they didn't feel comfortable there.
Yeah.
They just did. You could tell they never felt like they blended into the university atmosphere. So talk about how did you persevere during those times when you were struggling and you wanted to quit? What made you stick through it during those times?
I think it goes back to something that I said earlier, and that is finding community. Going to college is not just about your academic development and earning a degree and going out and getting a job. It's also about your personal development and learning how to your point, persevere through hard times. It teaches you about who you are, and it also teaches you about who you are not and what you may not be in life. And I think everyone has to go through that. So you asked a really interesting question earlier about college and higher ed, which I know a lot of people say, what's the value in higher education nowadays? It's a question that we all face. And one of the things that I tell people is if there is a unique opportunity for you to meet people from all over the world, right? Learn about yourself, get mentorship and guidance, and actively seek out that mentorship and guidance. It's not always going to come to you, but don't be afraid to reach out to people. Just like I did in high school, I was just asking someone for an informational interview and they picked up the phone and they said, yeah, come on over and talk to me. I think sometimes people are afraid to reach out or think that people aren't going to return their phone calls, which in reality, I found just the exact opposite to be true.
Yep.
Reach out to people. There are resources all around you. And so I had to do a lot. I had to do a lot of that myself. But I also had people who were saying, hey, Liz, this is how you get through college. You have to build great study habits. You need to learn. You need to get out there and do all these things. It's all a part of the experience.
Absolutely. So to jump into what you just said, how would a person, let's say somebody's watching this right now and they're like, man, that seems like a cool job she has. Wow, how could I do that? And they wanted to get mentorship from you. How would they go about doing that?
Just reach out to me. That's all you have to do is pick up the phone, actually. I think to your point about someone will sit there and look and say, wow, I really want to do Liz Tovar's job, right? And they really need to understand what really does go into an individual's job. What you think someone's job is may not always be what you see on the front page of a newspaper or them giving an interview. And I'm really big on, we've been fortunate here at Iowa, at least, to have a lot of great volunteers and grad students who were in a particular grad program and they wanted to come and work in our office and see what we do and how we do it. And a few years ago, I started opening up. I meet weekly with my staff within academic services. And a few years ago, we started allowing some of those grad students and those volunteers to listen to the conversations that are being had around the table and to help them understand that it doesn't matter what your title is within our office, that everyone is equally important to one another. And sometimes it's some of our staff who are really early in their professional careers that bring some of the best thoughts and suggestions to the table. So it's not just about having mentorship, but it's also looking around and saying, okay, who's not around this table, and how can we include more people around this table than not? So
absolutely. So it seems as though you're also saying that what's also important before you go gung-ho and I want to be mentored by this person to go down this path, you may want to shadow first and see what they're doing and experience it.
Absolutely.
And so did you have the opportunity to do that before you started your position, or was it because you were already working in that realm, you already saw it and knew what it was about before you started?
I was really fortunate to have, whether they be job shadowing opportunities or really just listening to the people around me. And that's one quality that I think people really need to rely on nowadays, is learning how to listen and learn. I just remember one of my previous bosses and listening to him when we were sitting in a staff meeting, and to really tune into, okay, how would I navigate this particular situation if I were in his shoes right now? And then thinking to myself, okay, now how did you arrive at that particular conclusion? And so asking a lot of great questions, listening, being tuned in, going to conferences, and doing all that fun stuff.
Okay. So seems though continuing education is a big part of it. You're always learning. You mentioned being a voracious reader. You got to give me the information. What are you reading? I need to know. What are you reading right now? Or a better question would be, what books would you recommend for someone who is aspiring to improve themselves, potentially go down your path, or maybe go down a different path, but they're looking to continually learn and get better?
Well, a few books that I get really excited about. One book that I absolutely love is The Ideal Team Player. And it talks about how do you go about building a great team environment or a great culture. I'm also a huge fan of Adam Grant and his book, Think Again, because regardless of what organization or business you're in, it teaches you how to sometimes break some of the habits that we sometimes fall prey to. And when we think we really know something, do we really know it? So it teaches us to retrain our mindset and some of the habits that we have. But a huge fan of his. And then the other book that I'm getting ready to read is called Atomic Habits. Our new athletics director, Beth Getz, it was a book that she had recommended to us as a staff. And it's how sometimes the small things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, it's not a big thing, it's the small things collectively that really lead to real powerful change. So getting ready to read that book, haven't started reading it yet, but those are some of my favorites.
I'm about to make an Amazon purchase.
There you go.
So you clearly are an avid reader. Has this always been a habit of yours? Have you been a voracious reader since you were a little kid? And if so, do you consider your affinity to reading, is that the reason why you've gotten to where you are now, or is it something that you picked up along the way?
Right. I remember during the summer months in Kansas, I remember my mom having me go through like these reading programs during the summer. And that was something that was instilled in me very early on. Now, as I got through grad school, I will tell you that I was reading so much and preparing my dissertation that after I got out of grad school, I was like, oh my gosh, this reading thing, it's too much for me. But then over time, I've just gotten back into reading as a way for me to not only learn, but it's also a way for me to help me relax, right? Because we all need to take care of ourselves. There are a few things that I love doing that helps me take my mind off of all of the world's problems some days, and reading is absolutely one of them. I'm also into painting. I'm here in my painting room right now. It's something that I got into a few years ago, and talk about, I don't even care about what's going on in the world around me when I start a painting. I'm not a very good painter, I will tell you that right now, but I do absolutely enjoy doing that.
I'm checking out some of your works back there.
Yeah.
So you look pretty good. No stick figures. I don't think
No stick figures. No.
So Liz, I would love to hear, because obviously you have an extensive background on two very awesome university campuses. I would love to hear, what challenges have you faced that are unique to being an African-American woman that you've had to overcome as a student on campus? Because I'm sure we'll have young people who are watching this who think about that. I know you mentioned the importance of being able to find a community, being connected to a community, but can you share any personal experiences or personal stories that you've had, maybe at the University of Kansas, or something that you've had to overcome, or an obstacle or an awkward situation or something like that?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I've had really positive experiences at all of the institutions where I've worked, but I also have noticed over time that, and it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, is I don't want to be the only person who looks like me in the room, right? Mm-hmm. And again, it's not to say that we need a room filled with people who look like Liz Tovar, but I do think that whether you're a business or an institution of higher education, you are more accessible and you do see better gains when you do have different people sitting around the table. And that can include race, gender, disability, you name it, international students or what have you. We're better when our tables look diverse. We really are. And I've seen and heard businesses say that time and time again, and I'm a firm believer like that. But you also have to be very strategic in order to make sure that your teams look diverse, right? And feel diverse. And diversity, when I think about this, I think about diversity of thought. That's really what comes to my mind. And so I think that is a challenge, that sometimes not all the tables that we're sitting around have that diversity of thought, diversity of opinion. And that's something that we really need to work on. When we think about college athletics, we know how to recruit people, right? And when you're sitting in a team room, you're going to be around all different types of people. We need to take that same recruitment mindset and strategic mindset of saying, how are we going to get people to the table? Because it doesn't just happen, right? You need your leadership to be very thoughtful and intentional about having a plan on how they're going to be able to do that. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face, is how do we intentionally recruit people to help out our organizations, to help our institution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when we talk about Black entrepreneurship and Black professionals, typically the road to that will begin with higher education. Right. Obviously, you have some people who are entrepreneurs who didn't go that route. Some people are professionals who didn't go that route. But the vast majority, the gateway to becoming this entrepreneur, this professional, is through higher education. Yeah. Talk to me about, because I don't know the statistics behind this, but what are the statistics like for African American enrollment in major colleges and universities? Has it been stable over the last few years? Is it increasing? Are you seeing an increase with one sex and decrease with another sex? What's the numbers like in that area?
Yeah. Well, I know that we have seen a trend in higher education of more women going to college than men in general. And I would say if you're looking at individuals from underrepresented backgrounds, it's been pretty flat, maybe with the exception of individuals who are Hispanic and whatnot. And so you really have to ask yourself the question, why are fewer men going to college? Why are still, after 40 years of affirmative action, why are our numbers with individuals from underrepresented groups continuing to stay so very stagnant? And then you brought up a great point earlier. You're hearing a lot of people now say, I don't really need to go to college. I can just go and work for this private company or this private organization right out of high school, right? And we know that those opportunities are growing and growing. And so I think a challenge for us in higher education in general is, how do we continue to prove to people that higher education is valuable to them? And another stat that I also remind people of is that whether it's your whether it's your income, whether it is the opportunity to have stable employment, that we know that there's a direct correlation between those things and going to college and finishing a degree. But one thing that is also something that I have on my radar are the number of individuals who go to college and then drop out of college without earning a degree. And that's concerning for a number of reasons. But in particular, we know that when many people go to college, that they're accruing some type of debt, right? And then now they've dropped out, they haven't earned a degree, and they're not employed, right? So I think another area that we need to look at. Something that also excites me is looking at partnerships between four-year institutions as well as two-year institutions of higher education. Is there a path there where students can go to a 2-year school, earn their associate's degree, and then come to a place like the University of Iowa. There's also terrific opportunities in terms of partnering with things like institutions like HBCUs and everything. So I think that definitely we need to give a lot of thought to some of the challenges that we face over the next 10 to 15 years. I will say, happy to say that our numbers at the University of Iowa do look really good. And so that's a positive thing, and we'll see where things go.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Because I do remember being at Iowa, and I do remember there being programs where they would actively recruit people in the Metro Chicago area. Mm-hmm. My wife is also an Iowa alumni.
Okay.
And I think that they came to her school or something like that. And yeah, that's great to hear that. Because I've always wondered, because growing up, I used to always hear the statistic, there are more Black men in prison than there are in colleges or universities. And then I recently found out that information is not accurate. But I was always wondering, what's the trajectory? So you're saying it's been flat for the last...
It's been flat for a very long time. And you mentioned someone coming into your wife's high school and recruiting individuals there. And one thing that I am very passionate about is how do we create pipeline programs? How do we recruit people in high school who maybe come from some of the most impoverished neighborhoods and put them on a trajectory to go to college and to come to Iowa or wherever you'd like to go? And then let's get these individuals jobs, because I think that's one of the gaps that sometimes we need to address is, yeah, it's fine that you go to college, but are you being employed once you graduate? That's an important piece of it. So pipeline programs are, I think, going to be critical for us and many other institutions of higher education. Is how do we get individuals from maybe even rural backgrounds who may not have access to college or to higher ed, and how do we help them pay for it? That's the other part to it too. That's another big piece. And we know that is one of the barriers for people when they are not retained, is that financial component of it. So how do we provide people with the scholarships and financial aid packages that are going to help them remain at our institutions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And wrapping up here, I guess the question I have for you is, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, but at your current role right now with the University of Iowa, if you had to project forward, just talking about the college enrollment levels and how they've been flat, projecting forward 5, 10, 15 years, what do you think is needed to be able to increase those numbers? And also, what do you think? Because the purpose of this podcast is to be able to add value to those who are aspiring to be upwardly mobile, career-wise, business-wise, whatever the case may be. Our mission is to be able to provide mentorship and provide access and provide representation so people can see people like you and believe maybe I can do it. Maybe they reach out to me. Maybe they reach out to you to try to get some mentorship. So the role that we're trying to play is trying to provide those visuals and provide that mentorship. But from an academic level, from a college level, let's say if you were the czar of all colleges and universities, what do you think is necessary to be able to increase that enrollment and also to be able to increase that graduation rate?
Right. So I think that one of the areas that we really need to be focused on is this kind of partnership and collaboration between K through 12 education and higher education. We know that if you have a great school counselor who's working there in your school, that your chances of going to college are much greater. We know that if you have a college prep program in your particular high school, that you are more likely to go to college than someone who does not. And I think one of the disturbing pieces that we really need to fix is when we take a deep dive into our K through 12 educational system, do students have access to the right math course, the right English course? All of these things matter in terms of collegiate enrollment. And so I think that partnership, collaboration, bridge, if you will, between what K through 12 is trying to do and what higher education is trying to do, we really need to truly be lockstep with one another. And a lot of this preparation also starts at a very early age, right? And so I think it's helping people understand what are the resources and opportunities that students need very early on in their educational experience that's going to set them on a path to success. And I talked about my family ingraining in me from a very early age about how education is important. But people, number one, they need to hear that when they're young. We also have to understand that students learn differently nowadays, right? And we need to make sure that we are being creative in the higher education space to allow people to come in and to understand how they learn and how can we build that culture around you to help you learn and be successful. And I think the same thing goes for K through 12 education. And we've seen from the pandemic, the results of students being in all online classes and not really being able to contribute in a really creative and positive way. So I think that's something that we really need to think about. Again, that K through 12 education and higher education, we really need to be lockstep with one another.
That is awesome. Liz, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it. I really believe that your words today are going to have a positive effect on some of our viewers. We appreciate you taking the time to share.
Listen, I appreciate you asking me. It's an honor to be able to join you today. And this was an easy conversation. This is the best part about my day today. So I appreciate getting to know you and just really want to commend you on the great work that you're doing. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right. That's the pod.